Welcome, 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 welcome. Welcome to Dave's Spooky Stories. I'm Dave. For years, I've listened to bedtime narration to help me relax and go to sleep. Now I've finally got the time to try to do it myself, for you. Please enjoy. Like and subscribe. Comment below. Give me your suggestions for topics. And sleep easy. Night-night. Story number 1. The Indian Motorcycle. The granary had stood on our farm longer than anyone in my family could remember. Its sun-bleached boards were warped from decades of Wisconsin winters and scorching summers, leaning just slightly to one side like it was too tired to stand up straight. No one used it anymore. Not since the last sacks of grain were hauled out years ago. Now it was mostly a home for mice, barn swallows, and cobwebs thick enough to feel alive. Even though it was just an old building, it seemed to hold its ground against time, like a sentinel guarding long-forgotten secrets. As a kid, the granary always fascinated me, especially since Dad told me not to go near it. "It's not safe," he warned me once, his voice heavy with that quiet authority he carried from the years he spent in the service. He didn't talk much about that time, but it had left its mark on him. When he said something, you listened, or you were supposed to. The granary stayed locked up tight for most of my childhood, but that just made it more enticing. Harper, my best friend from down the road, felt the same way. The summer we both turned 11, we became obsessed with the granary. What could be inside? Forgotten tools? Treasure? A nest of raccoons? Harper liked to joke that it was probably hiding a monster. I laughed, but I secretly liked the idea. It made the place feel even more mysterious. One evening, in early June, with the sun sinking low and fireflies blinking to life in the fields, Harper and I decided to finally see for ourselves. The door was warped and heavier than it looked. It took both of us shoving with all our might to wedge it open, and when it finally gave way, we stumbled inside, laughing and brushing dust off our clothes. The air in the granary was cooler than I expected, heavy with the smell of old wool and metal. Beams of sunlight poured through the cracks in the walls, slicing the gloom into golden ribbons and lighting up clouds of drifting dust. I thought it would feel like every other barn or shed I explored, but there was something different here, a stillness, a weight in the air, like the granary was aware of us somehow. "Creepy," Harper whispered, though her grin showed she wasn't scared. Not yet. We crept across the wooden floor, stepping over piles of broken tools and empty burlap sacks. The mice had been busy. Straw nests littered the corners, and tiny black pellets dotted the floor. It was what I expected until Harper stopped and pointed. "What's that?" she asked. I followed her gaze to the back corner of the granary, where the shadows seemed deeper somehow. My breath caught. There, tucked away in the gloom, was a motorcycle. A motorcycle. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Deep red, with chrome trim that glistened faintly in the dusty light. It looked untouched by time. Even the thin layer of dust couldn't hide how immaculate it was. The curves of its frame gave it an elegance that felt almost deliberate, like it had been designed to lure us in. It didn't make sense. Why would something this beautiful, this out of place, be here? "Whoa," I said softly, stepping closer. My sneakers scuffed against the floor, and the sound seemed too loud in the silence. "How did it get here?" "Maybe it was your dad's," Harper suggested. But that didn't make sense. Dad wasn't the type to let something like this sit unnoticed for years. The motorcycle seemed to pull us in, its presence magnetic. I reached out, brushing my fingers against the handlebars. The chrome was cool to the touch, and a shiver ran up my arm. It wasn't fear exactly, but it wasn't comfort either. It feels weird, I muttered, stepping back. Harper, braver than me, swung a leg over the seat, balancing easily with her feet dangling on either side. She grinned, her eyes wide with excitement. I bet it's magic. Like if we figure out how to start it, it'll take us somewhere. I laughed nervously, but something about the granary felt colder now. The golden light from outside seemed weaker, swallowed up by the dark corners of the building. And then, from somewhere behind us, a floorboard creaked. We froze. I turned, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just shadows. Harper laughed it off, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Then, without warning, a cat darted out from the shadows near the motorcycle, a black streak with yellow eyes. It stopped for a moment, staring at us, unblinking. Harper reached a hand out towards it, but the cat hissed and disappeared through a crack in the wall. That was weird, I said, my voice quiet now. My stomach churned, though I couldn't say why. Before Harper could respond, a new sound filled the air. A soft click, like the turn of a key. We both froze, our eyes snapping to the motorcycle. The sound had come from it. I was sure of it. You heard that right, I whispered, my throat tight. Harper nodded, her grin gone. The motorcycle didn't move, didn't start, but the air around it seemed to change. There was a hum, faint and low, like the vibration of a faraway engine. The stillness of the granary grew heavier, pressing down on us. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones. Let's go, I said, grabbing Harper's arm. She hesitated. Harper hated to back down, but something in my face must have convinced her. We scrambled out of the granary, leaving the door half open behind us. Outside, the evening light felt impossibly bright and warm, the world alive again with the sound of crickets and the distant hum of cicadas. Dad was waiting on the porch when we came back, his arms crossed. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. You went inside, he said. His voice was calm, but there was a weight to it. We just wanted to see, I said, staring at the ground. Dad sighed, his eyes drifting toward the granary. That bike's been there longer than I've been alive, he said. No one knows where it came from, and no one's ever going to find out. I wanted to ask more, but something in his tone stopped me. That night, laying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the motorcycle. The perfect red paint, the cold chrome, the faint hum. I didn't know what it was, but I felt it, waiting. Story number 2, the Lincoln Mark III. The sun was sinking, smearing the sky with streaks of orange and purple as I locked up the storage shed. The junkyard stretched out before me, piles of rusted cars stacked haphazardly like tombstones for forgotten machines. I wiped my hands on my jeans, greasy and stained from a full day of wrenching parts out of sedans that hadn't seen the road in decades. The place was quiet now, only the soft chirps of crickets and the occasional groan of settling metal breaking the silence. Most folks in town kept their distance from old Pete's yard, especially after dark. There were stories. There always are. Stories. But the one that stuck with everyone was about the black Lincoln Mark III. It wasn't just a car. It was an anomaly, a thing out of place. Pristine and gleaming, it sat on top of a mound of crushed vehicles, looking like it was above the decay and rot surrounding it. Nobody knew how it had ended up here or why it hadn't aged a day. Kids stared at each other to touch it, swearing afterward that they felt something, a vibration, a faint hum, like the car was alive. Pete wouldn't even go near it. Bad luck, he'd say with a shake of his head. That car's got a spirit. You leave it be. I never paid much attention to the stories. It was just a car, after all. But as I turned to head out that evening, something caught my eye. A flicker of light off the Lincoln's chrome bumper. It wasn't unusual. The car always seemed to catch the dying rays of sunlight, no matter where you stood. But tonight it felt deliberate, like it wanted me to notice. I froze, my boots crunching on the gravel. A low sound reached my ears, soft at first, almost imperceptible, the rumble of an engine. My pulse quickened. The yard was empty. Nobody else was here. I told myself it was just the wind, maybe a distant car on the highway. But when I turned back to the Lincoln, its headlights flared to life. My breath caught in my throat. The beam stabbed through the dimming light, piercing and cold. The engine roared, a deep guttural sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The car began to move, slowly descending the pile of wrecked vehicles. It didn't slide or tumble. It glided, smooth and steady, like gravity didn't apply to it. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a discarded tire. My heart was pounding now, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I could not take my eyes off the car. Its windows were blacked out, hiding whatever or whoever might be inside. It rolled closer, the growl of its engine vibrating in the air. The cold hit me next, sharp and unnatural, like stepping into the shadow of something immense and unknowable. "Pete?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The car stopped, just a few feet away, its glossy hood towering over me. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck, the undeniable sensation of being watched. The Lincoln idled, as though it were deciding what to do with me. Then, as abruptly as it had started, the headlights went dark. The engine cut out, leaving a vacuum of silence. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the sudden dimness, and it was gone. The Lincoln wasn't just farther away. It had vanished. The space where it had been was empty, save for the faint smell of gasoline and the lingering chill. I didn't sleep much that night. When I finally drifted off, it was only to dream of black windows and that terrible, throaty engine. The next morning, I showed up at the junkyard early, half hoping and half dreading what I'd find. There it was, perched atop the pile as though nothing had happened. The Lincoln Mark III, untouched and gleaming in the morning sun. I told Pete what I'd seen. He didn't seem surprised, though. "Told you that car's got a spirit," he muttered, lighting a cigarette with his calloused hands. "Picks who it wants to show itself to. You're lucky it let you go." His words stuck with me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I stayed far away from the Lincoln after that, avoiding its pile even in broad daylight. Junkyard was never the same for me. Every creak of metal, every whisper of wind, felt like a warning, a reminder of that night. The Lincoln Mark III stayed where it was, silent and waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching, its secrets locked away behind those blackened windows. And I couldn't help wondering, late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, what it might be waiting for. Story number 3. The leg. They don't pay me enough for this. I've been saying that to myself since the day I started working at Badger's Auto Salvage. But after today, I really mean it. Let me back up. My name's Randy, and I'm the guy you call when your clunker of a car finally bites the dust and you need a cheap replacement part to keep it limping along. My job is simple. Get greasy, dig through rusted out cars, and pray none of them collapses on me. Easy, right? That's what I thought until this morning. The day started like any other. The boss, Jerry, who smells like bacon grease and yells like a drill sergeant, was barking at me to pull a couple seats out of an old Buick Skylark. Apparently some guy named Todd needed them for a restoration project, which was code for, I'm driving this thing until the duct tape gives out. Randy, quit daydreaming and get to work, Jerry hollered, wiping his greasy hands on a towel that somehow made them even dirtier. I muttered something under my breath about unfair labor practices and headed out to the far corner of the yard where the Skylark sat. The thing was practically disintegrating. Its paint had faded from vibrant blue to a shade I could only describe as sad ocean. Sad ocean. And its wheels were buried halfway in the dirt. The windows were caked with grime so thick I couldn't see inside. Now usually, when I pull seats out of a car, I find your standard junk. Old fast food wrappers, sticky coins, maybe the occasional cassette tape. Kids, ask your parents what that is. But this time was different. Yes, it was. The driver's seat was stubborn, bolted down like it had no intention of leaving. I grumbled, wrestled with it, and finally yanked it free with a satisfying pop. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a Halloween prop someone had forgotten. There, under the seat, was a leg. Yep, a whole leg. Well, okay, it wasn't a whole leg. It ended mid-thigh, which somehow made it even worse. The skin was pale, almost waxy, and I swear it had toenails. I froze. My brain went into overdrive. Was it real? Was I about to become the guy who finds a body in a junkyard? Do I call the cops? Do I tell Jerry? Is this how I get fired? My thoughts were racing so fast I didn't even notice that the boss was stomping up behind me. Randy, what the hell's taking you so long? Jerry bellowed. I pointed at the leg, my arm stiff like I was signaling a plane on the tarmac. Jerry squinted, leaning in to get a better look. Then he squawked. Yes, squawked, like a bird caught in a net. What in tarnation is that? I'm pretty sure it's a leg, I said helpfully. Jerry scratched his leg, his expression a mix of horror and annoyance, like this was the worst thing that had ever happened to him. But he'd also kind of expected it. Well, poke it or something. See if it's real. Poke it? Are you serious? You poke it. Jerry shot me a look that could have peeled paint. You're the one who found it, genius. You do your job. Reluctantly, I grabbed a nearby screwdriver and gave the leg a gentle prod. It didn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I swear you could have hooked me up to a car battery and jump-started a semi. After a moment, I mustered up the courage to lean in closer. That's when I noticed it. A seam. A freaking seam running along the edge of the thigh. My voice high-pitched with a mix of relief and disbelief. Jerry snorted. You sure about that, Sherlock? Looks pretty real to me. I poked it again, harder this time, and the leg shifted, revealing a small tear near the ankle. I squinted at it and burst out laughing. It's a prosthetic. Someone left their prosthetic leg under the seat. Jerry's face turned 50 shades of red. A prosthetic? Who loses a leg and just forgets about it? What kind of a circus act was driving this thing? Now that I wasn't convinced I was standing over a murder scene, the situation struck me as hilarious. I mean, who just leaves a fake leg under their car seat? Did they crawl out of the junkyard on one foot? Did they forget they had a spare leg? I had so many questions and zero answers. Jerry, meanwhile, was in full damage control mode. We can't just let the customers see this. Bad for business. Jerry, we're a junkyard. Our business is literally garbage. Don't sass me, Jerry. Just get rid of it, okay? What am I supposed to do? Throw it in the dumpster? Set it free in the wild? Jerry pinched the bridge of his nose like he had a migraine. I don't care. Just make it disappear. At this point, Tripod, our shop cat, decided to make an appearance. Tripod earned his name the hard way. He lost his front leg in a mysterious accident involving a forklift and a ham sandwich. He was a scrappy little thing, all black fur and attitude, and he had a habit of showing up at the worst possible times, like now. Tripod sauntered over, took one look at the prosthetic leg, and promptly started batting at it with his one good paw. His tail flicked back and forth like he was trying to solve some great feline mystery. Jerry groaned. Even the damn cat thinks we're running a freak show. Maybe Tripod found a friend, I said, grinning. Don't encourage him, Jerry snapped. In the end, we decided to stash the prosthetic in the lost and found box, which was just an old milk crate filled with junk people had left behind. Keys, sunglasses, a single crock, you name it. The leg barely fit, sticking out of an awkward angle like it was trying to escape. As the day went on, word of the incident spread through the junkyard. By lunchtime, every employee was cracking jokes about the mystery leg. Todd, the guy who'd ordered the seats, finally showed up to pick them up. He took one look at the milk crate and asked, Why, there's a leg in your lost and found. Jerry just shook his head. Long story. Later that evening, as I was clocking out, I couldn't stop thinking about the leg. Who had left it? Why? Was it a prank? Or was it just one of those bizarre things that happens in life and never gets explained? As I walked past the milk crate, Three-Leg was still sitting next to it, his golden eyes fixed on the prosthetic like he was guarding it. Take care of it, buddy, I said, giving him a scratch behind the ears. He purred, his little tail curling around the crate. On my drive home, I couldn't stop laughing. It was the weirdest, funniest day I'd ever had at Badger's Auto Salvage, and that's saying something. I didn't solve the mystery of the leg, but I did learn one thing for sure. This job will never be boring. Story number 4, Windbreaker. The Two Rivers Junkyard wasn't really a junkyard. Not in the traditional sense, anyway. The boats weren't crushed or stripped for parts. They sat there whole, as if waiting for someone to drag them back into the water, waiting to live again. Grandpa called it the graveyard, and after spending time there, I understood why. The place stretched endlessly along the river's edge, a maze of fiberglass and rotted wood. Cabin cruisers made up the bulk of the collected, gutted interiors, moss creeping along their hulls like rust, but there were bigger vessels too. Trawlers and Great Lakes fishing boats sat like skeletons in the mud, their exteriors flaking paint and their insides hollowed out by decades of neglect. It was a strange place, caught somewhere between memory and decay, and Grandpa hated it. We were there looking for parts, bits of salvageable machinery, maybe something we could use to fix up his old Lund. The Lund wasn't much, just a dinghy with a sputtering outboard, but Grandpa still took it out sometimes, mostly for perch or bluegill, since the chubs are all gone now. The scarcity of chubs was what had made him retire. His old trawler had become more of a burden than a livelihood. So now he puttered around, fishing when he could, and avoided the graveyard whenever possible. But on this particular day, we had no choice. Grandpa had cracked the transom in the Lund, and we needed a replacement. Two Rivers Junkyard had parts and promise of cheap prices. So there we were. I don't remember exactly when Grandpa first saw the boat. We'd been wandering through rows for almost an hour, picking our way through busted propellers and coils of frayed rope. The air smelled like salt and damp wood, with a hint of diesel that lingered faintly as if the engines here still dreamed of running. The sun was high, baking the mud beneath our boots and casting long shadows over the neglected hulls. We rounded a corner, and there she was. Grandpa stopped dead in his tracks, his grip tightening on the wrench he'd been carrying. I turned to him, confused. His face had gone pale, his jaw slack, and his eyes were fixed on one particular boat. It was a trawler, about 40 feet long, its hull stained with grime and streaks of algae. The paint was peeling, but the name was still visible. Windbreaker. Windbreaker. I could see nothing special about it. Just another sad boat in a sad graveyard. Windbreaker. But Grandpa didn't move. "What's wrong?" I asked, glancing between him and the trawler. He didn't answer. His shoulders tensed, and he seemed to shrink, suddenly smaller than the man I knew. "Let's go," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "We don't need anything here." But, I said, "Let's go." He turned and stalked off, leaving me standing there in confusion. I stayed for a moment longer, looking at the windbreaker, trying to understand what had shaken him. The boat seemed normal, old and broken, like everything else in this place. It wasn't until later that I learned the truth. That evening, after dinner, I found Grandpa sitting on the porch, staring out at the river. He didn't look up when I joined him. I sat beside him, waiting. The crickets chirped in the tall grass, their song carrying softly through the dusk. Finally, he spoke. "That boat, the windbreaker," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "It shouldn't be here." "What do you mean?" I asked. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he gripped the armrests of his chair. "It sank years ago, out in the middle of Lake Michigan." I frowned, my chest tightening. "Are you sure it's the same one?" Grandpa nodded, his gaze fixed on the water. "I knew the crew. I fished with them sometimes. They were good men. In that boat, it went down in a storm. None of them made it back." I didn't know what to say. The idea of a sunken boat turning up in the junkyard felt impossible, absurd. But Grandpa wouldn't lie. "That's why you were scared," I said finally. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next day I couldn't resist going back to the graveyard. Grandpa refused to come, so I went alone, my curiosity outweighing my common sense. I wanted to see the windbreaker again, to prove to myself that it was just another boat, that Grandpa's reaction had been nothing more than a ghost of old memories. But as I made my way through the rows of wreckage, a strange unease settled over me. The graveyard felt different now, darker. The air was heavier, the shadows longer, the boat seemed to loom, the broken hulls more menacing than I remembered. And the farther I went, the quieter it became. No birds, no insects, just the faint creak of fiberglass in the wind. And when I reached the windbreaker, I stopped several yards away, staring at it. It looked the same as before, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. The name on its side seemed clearer, sharper, as though it had been repainted overnight. The algae streaks seemed to drip downward, moving even though the air was still. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. The deck was empty, the windows were dark, but I felt like someone was inside, peering out at me. My pulse quickened and my skin prickled with the urge to run, but I didn't. I climbed into the boat. The deck groaned under my weight, and the faint smell of mildew surrounded me. I moved carefully, stepping over tangled rope and rusted hooks. The cabin door hung open, its hinges squealing as I pushed it aside. The inside was dim, lit only by the sunlight filtering through the grime-covered windows. It was empty. No furniture, no equipment, nothing. But it didn't feel empty. The air inside was colder, sharper, and the shadows seemed to move when I blinked. I shivered, stepping backward, and my heel caught on something. I turned and saw a boot, old and worn. Its leather cracked with age. It didn't look like it had been there long. My chest tightened, and I stumbled out of the cabin, back onto the deck. That was when I heard it. A faint sound, like voices, carried on the wind. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, desperate. When I got home, I found Grandpa sitting on the porch again, his face lined with worry. He didn't ask where I'd been. He already knew. "Don't go back there," he said, his voice firm. "Don't go back there," he said, his voice firm. "Some things, they should be left alone." I didn't argue. Looking back, I don't know what we saw, what we felt. The windbreaker never moved, never did anything. But its presence lingered, heavy and suffocating. Maybe it was just an old boat, or maybe it was something more. Whatever it was, I never went back to the graveyard, and neither did Grandpa. Story number 5. The Desert Bus. The desert always held a strange pull over me. Its vast emptiness, its blistering silence. There was something unspoken in its bones, something timeless. I'd spent decades photographing forgotten places, remnants of lives left behind, rusted signs, crumbling motels, abandoned gas stations, but this time, the desert had something special waiting for me. I first saw it from a ridge, a faint shape on the shimmering horizon, distorted by heat waves. A school bus, of all things, sitting alone in the middle of nowhere. Even from a distance it looked ancient. Its yellow paint had faded to a chalky white, and its windows glinted like broken teeth. I stood there a while, squinting through my camera's zoom lens, but it was hard to make out details. The air seemed to ripple around it as though the bus carried its own heat, separate from the sun. It took me over an hour to hike down to it, each step stirring up red dust that clung to my boots and filled the air with a dry, earthy tang. The closer I got, the quieter the desert seemed to grow. Normally there'd be the sound of a breeze sifting through sagebrush, maybe the distant screech of a hawk. But here, there was nothing. Just the crunch of my boots and the occasional creak of my camera strap. When I finally reached the bus, I stopped a few yards away, hesitant to get too close. Up close, it was even older than what I'd thought, probably from the 1960s, maybe earlier. The metal was pockmarked with rust, its edges jagged and curling like torn paper. Most of the windows were shattered, their shards scattered in the sand like tiny mirrors, and the tires had long since rotted into blackened husks. The roof sagged inward, as if some unseen weight had pressed down on it for years. For a long moment, I just stood there, taking it in. It felt wrong, somehow, to break the silence. Finally, I raised my camera. The click of the shutter echoed, sharp and unnatural. I adjusted the focus and took another shot, and then another. The bus seemed to shift in the viewfinder, its edges blurring in a way that made my stomach twist. I lowered the camera, blinking. Of course it hadn't moved. The heat was playing tricks on me, as it always did. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the bus didn't belong here. Not just in the desert, but in this world. I walked closer, circling it slowly, the sun glaring off the rusted metal, and I had to shield my eyes with one hand. The side of the bus was peeling, flakes of paint curling like old wallpaper. I ran my fingers over the surface. It was rough, almost scaly, and left orange smudges on my skin. The door hung open, its hinges so rusted that they barely looked capable of movement. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The air was stifling, heavy with the smell of decay and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. The seats were mostly intact, though their upholstery had been shredded by time and weather. Piles of sand had gathered in the corners, spilling onto the floor in soft drifts. I moved, slowly, down the aisle, the floor creaking beneath me. My camera dangled from its strap, forgotten. Each seat told a different story. Some were slashed open, stuffing spilling out like entrails. Others had strange stains on them, dark and faded with age. I noticed a few carvings on the seat backs, names, dates, crude hearts with initials inside. But the carvings didn't look right. They weren't the playful scrawls of bored kids. They were deeper, almost frantic, as though someone had dug them in with shaking hands. Near the back of the bus, I found something that made me stop cold. A single shoe, small and faded, sitting in the aisle. It was coated in dust, but it didn't look as old as everything else. My pulse quickened. I knelt to pick it up, turning it over in my hands. The rubber sole was cracked, but not brittle, and there was still a faint pattern on its polka dots. I set it down carefully, trying to ignore the unease rising in my chest. Something scraped behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell, my heart hammering against my ribs. The bus was empty, the desert silent. I licked my lips, tasting salt and dust, and forced myself to take a deep breath. It was just the wind. It had to be. But the air felt so still. I straightened up and stared back toward the front, my steps quicker than before. The bus seemed darker now, the sunlight struggling to reach its corners. My camera swung against my hip with each step, its weight suddenly suffocating. When I stepped outside, the sunlight was blinding. I raised a hand to shield my eyes, letting the heat wash over me. The open desert felt like a blessing after the oppressive weight of the bus. I leaned against its side, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I noticed the tracks. Faint but distinct. A set of footprints leading away from the bus and disappearing into the sands. They weren't mine. The treads were different, smaller. My skin prickled, and I turned in a slow circle, scanning the horizon. Nothing but empty desert. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I decided I'd taken enough photos for the day. As I trudged back towards the ridge, the bus loomed behind me, its shadow stretching farther than it should have. I forced myself not to look back, though the urge was almost unbearable. My throat was dry, my steps uneven. The desert didn't feel like the same place I'd entered earlier. It felt older, heavier, like it had woken up and started watching me. When I finally reached my car, I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My hands trembled as I started the engine, and I couldn't bring myself to look in the rearview mirror until I was well down the road. When I did, the bus was still there, a pale smudge against the horizon. But it did not look as far away as it should have. That wraps it up. Good night. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. New stories come out Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays.